we tend to, and as kids, we develop this black and white thinking, right? That's a good person, that's a bad person,
Yeah.
It's a stranger, that's bad. But I think part of maturity and emotional and mental health is being able to like put your arms around all of it. Like, right? I'm a good person and a bad person. And so are you. And like we're both. And to have that more flexibility and using
Yeah.
like you can be angry and loving. You can be sad and grateful.
Yeah. Welcome to Brainstoke. I'm Tom Telford here with Dr. Julie Hanks. Thank you for allowing us to be here.
My pleasure.
So fun. Tons of questions for you, but we got to start with, let's go back to this 90s fame in LDS music. So when did you start performing and how long was the run?
Okay, well, I need to clarify because people will hear Dr. Julie Hanks and they're like, why are you talking about music?
Yeah.
So I use Julie D. Azevedo for music.
Okay.
So
you
and
still
some
use
people
that
don't
name.
know that that I'm the same person.
Okay.
So all my music is under D. Azevedo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maiden name.
So people will go like, what? Sometimes, like, wait, you're that 90s musician, So anyway, I started writing songs end of high school, so later 80s, and did my first solo album in the, 89, 88?
Yeah.
And then I did my most recent one maybe like 6 years ago.
Wow.
So
you're still at it.
Yeah.
Do you love to write? I mean, do you love to write and perform it, or what?
The writing? So because I performed most of the time while married with children, performing became associated with a ton of stress. Like it's really hard to travel with little kids, and so so performing got merged with really stressful.
Yep.
Just getting there is just hard, But I mean, it was really so fun to just be in front of an audience.
Yeah.
And have them singing along, and it's crazy fun. But the writing is kind of my.
Yeah.
I'm
outlet.
a performing songwriter more than like a vocalist.
Yep.
So
I have to ask you because I love to write.
Yeah.
And,
music?
No.
Okay.
No.
Just
I just like to write.
Yeah.
It started young, I think, because I struggled in school, and I was raised in a family where it wasn't a nonverbal family, but there wasn't a lot of expressive communication happening.
Really?
No.
Because you're so expressive.
Right?
So it must have been like, what is going on
I
here,
think it's
people?
because I've been coached up by an amazing spouse who's very expressive.
Okay.
But younger, I caught on to this idea of writing. I could kind of check out. I wasn't good in school, but I liked to write, and it became just this outlet. As I've gotten older, I've recognized I'm a wannabe athlete too. So I know the runner's high. I ride. This morning I rode. I love the athletic mind, body-mind connection. But writing is interesting for me because I actually I didn't know this term until now, but that you can get into flow.
Mm-hmm.
So does that make sense, that term?
It totally does. Yeah.
So say more about that, because for someone who's written music and has done it as long as you have, there's a genius there. There's something that's going on in flow.
Yeah. I have gone at times like into a different state, the flow state where it's challenging, but you have just enough mastery that you can do it. It's not too hard. And then just feeling like, it's just a different state of existence. And it's really a cool thing to experience. And I think everybody has experienced at times, whether it's doing a sport or, you could be hiking or just where you're just in the moment and that balance of like competency and challenge kind of hits a sweet spot, and
Yeah.
you're just
Use the word
happy.
competency there. So double click on that.
Okay.
Say more about that, because I think that, and we'll dive further into this as we keep going, but there's something there between competency and the knowledge and capability of self, and being in a moment where the genius comes out too, and it seems like it's continued on in your career in a different
Wow.
way.
Thank you.
And-
Genius. Nobody's ever called me that before.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about that, because the part of the reason I'm here and that I met you is that I was at a conference and I heard you speak, and I knew 5 minutes into listening to you that this is a different mind in the mental health industry. And not that I've met tons of people,
Yeah.
but you have this mental health clinical side, but there's something else that's going on in your ability to connect with people and your peers and stand in front of audiences
Yeah.
that
Thanks.
it looked flow state to me watching you do it. And it makes sense, having years and years of standing in front of audiences performing.
And speaking too.
Yeah.
Decades. Yeah.
So what's the competency part of that gets you into a flow state?
Yeah. So in flow, it's really like you have to have some skill in order, or it's overwhelming. You don't get in flow state, right? If
Yeah.
it's not, if you don't have some level, like say you're playing tennis, if it's your first time playing tennis, it's hard to get into flow because
Yeah.
you're like conscious of everything.
Yeah, you're going to miss the ball
Right.
and hit it out of the park.
And so you have to have enough knowledge of or skill in what you're doing that you can go into this flow state and not think about what you're doing. Right? You
Yes.
just be present and not be
Yes.
not be in your mind.
Yep.
I mean, when I'm writing songs, I'm in my mind, but it's a different part of my mind.
Yeah.
It's hard to
We're-
describe.
It is hard to describe, but there's something there that I would love for audiences who listen, especially the teen and someone going into their 20s, that no matter what it is, whatever you choose in your path, to get into that state where you're like, this is me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do this really well. It's practiced. It's having hours and hours and hours of doing it, building competency that allows you to then have the confidence to get into that flow state where you're like, I'm in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm really good at this. Whether it's a
Yeah.
basketball player or a singer or
Yeah.
even a therapist, there's a confidence level that comes when you have mastered a competency.
Yeah, yeah. And you can go into flow state if just walking, right? You've mastered walking. You
Mhm.
can be in your body in the moment, really enjoying it. So it doesn't have to be some effortful thing that you've
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to learn how to walk at some point, but I think sometimes people think, well, I can't get there unless I've put in all this time, which you do for certain things, right?
Yeah.
But for other things, you don't. It's just part of
Yeah.
living. And I think learning how to get into flow
Yeah.
where you're just in the moment and enjoying it.
The flow, we talked about it as writers, but the flow, in my opinion, is, like you said, it can happen in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah.
What is going on in the mind in that moment? Do you know enough about brain science? I know you know this, but I have to think in my head. I mean, the premise of Brainstoke, and that we talk often, is the 5 S's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we joke about it at times, but in reality, what we're trying to say to people is do the activities that cause serotonin and endorphins and oxytocin, all the happy chemicals
Yeah.
to fire in your brain so that what? So that you get into this state of mind, the flow state.
Yeah.
It could be a runner's high, it could be whatever, but say more about that.
I don't know exactly the brain science, but I do know that I love being in that state, and I love seeing other people like, oh, they were born to do this.
Mhm.
Like this is, whether it's, speaking or writing or running or biking or dance or
Yeah.
sing, whatever. When people are doing what they're on the planet to do,
Hmm.
it's just such a inspiring thing.
Totally.
And I don't know exactly the brain science, but I did study creative productivity for my PhD. So I did study
Yeah.
flow and,
Yeah.
yeah.
What did you learn from that?
Gosh, so many things. It's like taking me back to my to my school days. Well, I learned that there's actually a different way of being in the world called a highly creative person. That's actually the thing. And I finally got my diagnosis through my dissertation. I was like, oh, I'm a highly creative person.
Yeah.
And so there's actually highly creative people are full of paradox. You're an introvert, extrovert.
Yeah.
You are, integrate thinking and feeling, traditional and rebellious. Like there's all of these paradoxes. And part of the definition is like living in a way that where you don't have a choice but to create novel works and disseminate them into the world.
Wow. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah.
What is novel works?
So something that hasn't existed before. It could be a recipe, right? It could be some kind of mathematical equation, or, it could be anything. For me, it's songs. For me, it's my business. It's experiences. It's conversation. Like we're having this conversation that's never happened before. Like
Yeah.
that's a creative.
Yeah.
That's a creative process.
I think a lot of people hear that word at times, creative. I've tried to broaden my own mind about who is creative or what is creative. Say a little more about that, because creative, I think people are thinking they
Arts.
finger paint or art or
Arts
whatever.
and craft.
But
That's part of it. For my dissertation, I really made it broad. It's any kind of creative, like where you birth something into existence that didn't exist before. So its actual birth is creative. It is. It's. I have a friend who loves birthing sourdough bread, like right, like trying different
she
recipes.
has a start.
and like mixing different things in. That's creative. It doesn't have to be dance, music, visual arts, design, those kind of things. It could be those things, but not necessarily. I think business, birthing a business, having a vision of something that's never existed, and then bringing that, like into existence, is a creative act.
How did you land there? I mean, you were studying, and you decided, I've got to land on this, PhD project. How did you get to that point?
I'll tell you exactly. My dissertation chair said I was really struggling with narrowing it down, because I have so many interests and so many questions, and that it was really hard to narrow it down to some little minuscule part of this little
You're
tiny...
a don't box me in personality. I know you are.
I was like, I have to focus. It's really hard. And he said, write about what you know. And I said, well, I know how to get stuff done and be creating a family. So I wrote about creative productivity of mothers was the more specific thing. And people have kind of said, well, how have you been able to do this and have a family and, stay married?
Write music and perform. And,
how, I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out with my dissertation. So it was pretty...
Is that you? Dive in and I'll figure it out.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, even with this podcast, I'm like, I don't know what I want to talk about. Let's just talk,
Totally.
Like, just
what's interesting is, I mean, we've been doing this a couple of years. Almost every entrepreneur, business owner, startup person, at some point in their podcast, they use those exact terms. I'll figure it out. I just need to commit.
Yeah.
It's my passion. It's creative. I have a vision for it. I just need to get started and I'll figure it out.
Well, that's just how I do everything. Like before I wrote my first book, Like, I don't know how to write a book. How do I write a book? I'll figure it out. Like, I'll
Yeah.
start writing. I guess I do an outline. Like, and I think that my parents gave me and my siblings a unique gift in that, like, we know we can figure it out. Not everybody who has this dream believes they can figure it out,
Yeah.
you know?
Let's talk about that for a minute. Just spend, 5-10 minutes, whatever, describing childhood and that psychology. Because clearly, based on all you've accomplished and the things that you've done, you were either born a doer and accomplisher, or you were nurtured into it, or maybe both.
Yeah.
But let's hear more about your
Yeah.
background.
So my dad is a professional musician, composer, arranger, and he was a trained concert pianist.
Hmm.
We lived in LA. So I was surrounded by creative people. My paternal grandmother and her sisters had a TV show in the 60s and 70s
Wow.
called The King Family Show. My grandma was a famous singer in the big band era. So there's kind of this confidence and like self-absorption. You kind of have to be, in order to get up in front of people or write a book, or you have to kind of think somebody cares about what you
Yeah.
have to say, you
Yeah.
know? So I think I inherited some of that, like that confidence, and
Yeah.
that it's okay to be seen by other people. Like, it's okay to put yourself out there in front of people. And it's like, you can do whatever you want. And I think I saw that in my dad. He was an entrepreneur, musician. He never like went to a job. He was creating music, and
Yeah.
like, oh, that's cool. You can
Yeah.
kind of create your own life. You know?
Yeah. When I think about that, based on my own experience of being an entrepreneur and some of the things that I've done, I have to think that you had the confidence to get up and stand up in front of people, and that's okay. But to do that, you also have to be okay with rejection and failure.
Mm-hmm.
So what did they teach you about that growing up? I mean, did you just knock it out of the park all the time?
No, oh,
Right?
heavens,
I mean,
no.
it seems like
there were performances that I did early on where I'd come home and like, I'm never doing just bawling. I'm never doing this again. This is horrible. You know.
perception of being horrible, or literal like Rotten Tomatoes thrown.
Like both, probably, if I'm honest. I forgot your question when you
Failure.
said rotten. Okay.
Failure and rejection, right? I mean, there's something about standing up on a stage, whether you're speaking or
Yeah.
singing, and reading the crowd while you're delivering the message,
Right.
and trying to keep going when the body language that they are reflecting back to you isn't, they're stoked to be there and
Right,
hearing
right.
what you've got,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that at some level, I've always kind of known, like, felt a sense of self,
Mm-hmm.
and known, like, I'm okay.
I got it.
Like, not that I'm great, but
Yeah.
it's like, this will pass. I'm okay, you know?
That's awesome. Was it instilled by your parents? I mean, to an extent, were you performing in the home, maybe for dad one-on-one, singing? He's like, no, this is really good. Or
Yeah,
this is.
I remember my grandma hearing me sing and just going like, you really have a gift. Like, wow, you really have a gift. And that meant a lot coming from her. And my dad would, when I was really little, I have this just adorable picture, but he would be my human karaoke. So I would stand on the piano bench and I'd say, play this song. And he'd just play it. He could play it at any key and play this song. And I would just sing out into the room, you know.
Yeah.
So I have some really early memories of having my creativity be nurtured
Yeah.
that way. And I think that gave me the confidence. I mean, I still had tons of insecurities
Yeah.
but like, I think at the core, it's like, I've always felt like I'm on the planet to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's scary, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, it's awesome. We talked a minute ago about flow state.
Yeah.
When did you know that you could get into flow state singing and you were like, not just that you were delivering it and you felt like that it was good, but that you were stoked doing it? That the
Yeah.
flow, the happy chemicals while you were doing it, you were having that experience and it reinforced, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep writing and performing.
Yeah. So I mostly went into flow state in writing, not performing. There was always a lot of anxiety around performing that I was fighting with. And so there are fewer times where I got into flow state in performing and a lot more in writing.
Interesting.
In my own room,
Yeah.
by myself or co-writing with someone else.
Do you have a memory of getting into flow state on a certain song where it was just flowing out of you?
I've had that experience. I don't have a specific memory of that.
Any one song?
Not that I can think of. I remember having highs, this is so cool. I cannot believe I'm up here and I'm having this relationship with this audience that's really like, who gets to do this? This is so cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any one location or experience that way that you can remember that just stuck out to you? Maybe it was when you were a young mom too, and your kids started to see like, oh, like this mom is cool. Like this is good,
So experience what specifically?
Performing.
Oh,
singing in front of them.
They would. Yeah. Well, my older. So I have two kids that are in their 30s, and then two that are young adults.
Yeah.
And my older kids are like, we had the singer-songwriter mom, and you have the TV and book writing mom, or the podcasting or social media mom. We had different moms. Like, you kind of did. I was doing therapy when I was doing music too, but I was leading with music. And then over time, it kind of shifted, and I started leading with my therapy work.
So just to cap this off, because I didn't ask you, but your parents, mom and dad, raised traditional household relatively?
Mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Yep. How many siblings?
9 kids.
9.
Mm-hmm.
So performing dad, 9 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Did your mom
In
didn't
LA.
work outside the home?
Nope.
That's incredible.
Never.
In LA.
Yeah. Working as a musician. And we had a really great, comfortable life.
So he was good.
Yeah.
And
he had a lot of in with his family who was already.
They were in it.
Yeah. He got home from an LDS mission and immediately was producing records at Capitol Records.
Wow.
Because of the connections.
Mm-hmm.
So
What's your
tons of privilege.
Yeah.
Tons of privilege.
What's your parents' names?
Lex and Linda.
Yeah, we have to say it.
Lex and Linda. Lex de Azevedo, Linda de Azevedo.
Cool. Well, I think that the Lex name is known,
by some.
Pretty far and wide.
Yeah.
So I definitely was raised on Lex. So
the younger generation doesn't mean anything to them. But the older so you're aging yourself by knowing who Lex
For
de
our
Azevedo
audience,
is.
though, if you have not heard of Lex de Azevedo or Julie de Azevedo, check it out, because I think that there's my generation, those who are graduating in the 90s, you knew it. Like it was, and if you were LDS especially, it was played constantly. So
which
it's part of our childhood.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's cool. So you have 4 children, a couple in their 30s, a couple in their young 20s.
17 and 21.
Cool. Boys, girls?
Boy, girl, same family twice.
Same family twice.
I mean, it's almost eerie.
Yeah.
We sit with, a few years ago, a few years ago, we were sitting with the younger two, like deja vu. We've already raised these children. Like, we've done this before. It was just so funny.
Same energy the second time around?
Similar. I mean, they're all different people, right? But yeah, like my sons are similar, my daughters are similar. So
that's cool.
Yeah, and the younger two, their middle names are their older siblings' names.
Really?
At the request of their older siblings.
Huh. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I've not heard of that before.
Yeah. So
That's neat.
my oldest is Tanner, and when I was pregnant, he was with my third. He was 12, and he's like, "If it's a boy, can you name him after me?" I was like, "What 12-year-old boy cares about?" I'm like, "If it's a boy and it goes with the name we choose,
Yeah.
then yeah, we'll think about it." And
Yeah.
then it was a boy, and so then
That's a cool connection.
Owen Tanner is his
Yeah.
name, and then my daughter Madeline was like, "Well, what about me?" I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not.
Gotta
I
keep-
don't know if we're gonna have another child, and if we do, it may not be a girl, but if we do, we'll consider. And then we had a girl, and so she's Macy Madeline.
Cool.
Anyway, kind of fun.
That's awesome. That's a fun family to be at this stage with them.
Yeah.
I want to talk about them a little bit more because we'll dive into our topic, specifically. But at what stage did you go from I am a performer, writing music, performing music, to I want to study mental health or get into the counseling profession?
It was all at the same time, really. So my freshman year at college, I was performing and studying and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. And I had a very positive experience in therapy, or several in therapy as a teenager. And so I thought that was definitely something that I strongly considered. So while I was performing and doing all of those things, I was in school, and I just continued on and got my master's.
Yeah.
And I got married and had kids and was performing. And so they kind of grew together.
Yeah.
I remember the day before I started college, just crying to my parents, like feeling like I had to choose. Like, do I want to do music or school? And I was like, well, maybe I don't have to choose. That's kind of a theme too. Like, you don't have to choose. You just do what you want to do.
Yeah. Was that a scary thing? I mean, why were you nervous about that? A commitment to one or the other?
I hadn't seen anybody do both,
Mm-hmm.
and especially a woman who had a family.
Yeah.
I mean, having two careers is a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. So you were in therapy as a teenager, and that informed you wanting to be in it. Sounds like it was a positive
it was
experience
life-changing.
for you.
It put me on a totally different trajectory.
Yeah. Share more about that. Why were you going to therapy, if you don't mind sharing your experience?
I had a ton of conflict with one of my siblings and was really unhappy, and my parents didn't know. I was probably had mild depression, not anything serious. So that was how I started into therapy. And I feel like it just opened my eyes to the world of intangibles. We have thoughts, we have feelings, there's motivations, there's relationships that you can't see, but they're just as real. And then really like self-discovery, like, oh, well, who am I and what do I think and what do I want? And so to start on that journey as a teenager was really just such a gift.
Yeah.
To be aware, because I was on a trajectory that was probably not very deep. I feel like I've become, but I was kind of like as a teenager into, clothes and boys and like superficial stuff, and it kind of helped me and I don't have to choose. I can be superficial sometimes, and I can be very thoughtful, and so
there's so much there that I love that you've shared, and that I want to just dive a little bit further into this because were you into athletics by chance growing up, doing any sports or anything like that?
I was, believe it or not, I'm 5'2". I was on the basketball team
in
I was
LA,
the point guard,
nice.
And then I was a cheerleader.
Yeah, cool.
So I wasn't really like into sports, but I did sports. I would play tennis and things like that. But
the reason that I ask is that I was into sports. I was into all of it.
Yeah.
One of the indirect benefits of being in athletics is that from a young age, regardless of the sport they're doing, or even the activity, it could be on the chess team,
Yeah.
but being involved in teams at some level, youth get some start of coaching on their mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And we often think, I hear this all the time. I don't want to go to therapy, or I don't, therapy's lame or whatever. But in reality, if people are in sports or if they're on teams, if they're lucky, they have teachers who will get into mindset.
Yeah.
Parents may or may not necessarily say a lot about mindset, but the greatest benefit, in my opinion, in therapy, one, if you're dealing, coming clinically or going clinically to address something specific, a trauma or something. But if you've never been on teams or had coaching or any of those things, you may go your whole life without anybody talking to you about your mindset.
Yeah.
And so as a teen, whether you were addressing conflict with a sibling or whatever, but you were miles ahead by the time you probably got into your 20s, just the way you think, and that you knew how to go internal
Right.
with your thought processes and how you think about certain things. And even having an adult say, hey, you know what, Julie, it's okay to think about it different.
Right.
Maybe you can do both. And isn't that huge?
Yeah.
As a benefit to have, when I think through that. So,
And mindset and emotions. Like, oh my gosh, there's a lot going on here. And how do you sort through that? And how do you make sense of it? And how do you not let it overwhelm you? And kind of how to be aware of thoughts and feelings, and then how to use them to create the life you want.
Yeah, totally. My first therapist, as I kind of think back, my first therapist was probably a Little League baseball coach, which is kind of interesting to think through, right? I mean, we often think like therapy on a couch, clinical, I lay down, I cry, and I leave, and I'm, fixed or whatever. But it's really getting into these thoughts and emotions. And it really was a young baseball coach who I struck out. I came back to the batter's box, and he was, or to the dugout. And he just said, you know what, Tom, it's okay. You're going to get another chance.
Yeah.
And it was the first time like, oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
And so just those little moments, I think oftentimes people think therapy has to be this traumatic or clinical experience, and many need that.
Right.
Our own family has benefited greatly from that. But say more about that just in terms of therapy and how that positioned you to move on to become a therapist.
My own therapy?
Yep.
I started reading a lot. I was not a reader growing up, and my therapists, I had multiple therapists throughout like 14 on through my life, but they started recommending books, and I started reading like self-help books, and it was just so the way that it just resonated with who I am. Like, oh yeah, it makes sense that this would feeling would, and this thought would be connected, or I remember reading a book about grief as a teenager, and going, oh my gosh, life is just all about like losses, and just coming to terms with loss, just kind of these
Struggle.
deep thoughts for a teenager, right?
How did it feel different than school? I mean, why in therapy was it okay to have books like, hey, read this book, where in school you're like, oh my gosh.
Well, because it
an
wasn't,
assignment.
I loved reading the books from sociology and psychology classes.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wasn't, also in my family, I wasn't the smart one. Like there's roles, especially in big families, right? Like I wasn't the smart one. And so it wasn't part of my, like
your persona.
And I didn't particularly enjoy it, until later. So I started reading books, and I think I had a natural fascination with humans, and like, why do we do what we do? And how can we all have the same parents, but we're all really different? And just, I would ask questions about human nature. why do I feel the way I feel? And yeah, just trying to make sense of the world. And it
Yeah.
really helped me to do that and to experience, to have a different experience. Like in therapy, you have someone there that's just there to witness you and your experience. Like, when do we have that? Not very often.
Yeah. What's the closest thing? Parents?
Parents are horrible at it. Usually. Like, I'm probably horrible at it with my kids.
Well, I am too, right? But I think that that's the perception. If I need someone to talk to, I need to talk to my parents.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think parents are great, but parents have such an agenda for their kids
Mhm.
in general that it's hard just to witness and just be with. It's like you want to solve it and you want to, tell them what to do and you want to like tell them to shape up and lecture
Yeah.
and I think friends probably, somebody just to like be with you and go, yeah, that totally sucks,
Yeah. Totally.
and just kind of be with you, except the therapists are trained to know how to move you through it.
Yeah.
But a huge part of it is just being present with someone in their pain because most of us have been alone in our pain.
We're going to double click on that. I want to hear
Okay.
more about that. But if you go back to your own therapeutic experience and moving on to studying it, at what point did you say, I can see myself doing this? And was it a feeling like you leaving the therapist's office and going, I really want to be that person for somebody else?
I don't remember a moment, but I did have that sense.
Mhm.
Like I could be this for someone else. And I was kind of toying around with like teacher or like something in that realm, but therapist was for sure a consideration.
It's cool. Developed over time, just that, again,
Like interest and
yeah.
and what therapy helped me do was develop a sense of self. I think at an earlier age than I would have. I probably would have just gone autopilot like I was doing,
Yeah.
So
you got into school, you got a master's.
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's, then just went straight on for my master's.
Mm-hmm. And your master's is in
Social work.
specifically. And then
Yeah.
did you immediately start your PhD program? Or was
No,
it?
I went back 20 years later.
Okay.
I graduated exactly, I think almost exactly 20 years from when
Wow.
I graduated with my master's.
What was it about going back? I also went back to school after 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was different, totally different
Yeah.
experience. But what did you want or what was missing that you wanted more of at that point?
I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to learn and grow and just expand my mind. And I just had been kind of doing the same things, thinking the same way. I just wanted to learn how to think better.
Yeah.
And I kind of am the type that I'll think of something like, oh, that sounds cool. And then I'm like, okay, how am I going to do that?
And then you're obsessed with it.
Not always obsessed, but just like,
Yeah.
I'm going to
You
make
can't
that
let it
happen.
go.
I'm going to make that.
Yeah.
I want that. When I was younger, I'm like, it would just be so cool to be Mr. and Dr. somebody, like maybe I want to be, so that sounds so silly, but I'm like, that would be really cool to be like, because it's always Dr. and Mrs. It's like, I want to be a Mr. and Dr.,
Yeah. Which
So-
we need to talk about. I want to talk about that too.
But that was not the reason I went back. I
It's
wanted
probably
to
not
challenge
enough.
myself. I was leading a team here at Wasatch Family Therapy.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you know what? I want to step it up. I want to know more and learn more and challenge myself.
Yeah. When you think through that first 20 years building Wasatch Family Therapy, building the Dr.Julie Hanks brand and all of that, was there a sense of, I lived the first 20 years on hustle and charisma, so to speak? and you wanted, I mean, those are the words that I would use to describe my experience of, I was not known as the smart kid either, struggled in school, but I really lived on hustle and charisma. I'm just going to figure it out. And it worked, but I was tired. And I wanted the second half of life to be less fatigue driven and more intellectual driven. I want to work smarter, not necessarily harder. Did you have that? I mean, I wanted to learn too. I wanted to grow my mind, but that was part of the reason. I don't want to necessarily backslide. I want more. I want to keep growing, but I don't want to do it with my time and energy as much as I want my intellect to figure it out.
And I think I was already there before I went back to school. Like I was already, I'm trying to think if that fits. I mean, I did hustle a lot and work really hard and juggle a lot of things.
I can't imagine. I mean, it's incredible. A mom, all that you're doing, building a business, all of it. I mean, that's...
I look back and it makes me so tired. It just makes me want to cry. Luckily, I had a lot of good support. You know, my husband's amazing. We had just other support team, you know. Now, what was you were talking about?
It's all good. Just motive of why going back to get the PhD.
My whole life, I've always wanted options. I'm going to keep my options open. And I thought that would open more options.
Yeah. In the very beginning, you mentioned the word paradox. For 5 years, you know, when people say, my word this year is, mine hasn't changed in 5 years, and it's paradox. I've had to get comfortable with the idea of paradox because it's the only way I can make sense of a lot of things, including being LDS, you know, being married, being an entrepreneur, being all of the things that I do and enjoy. I've had to get comfortable with paradox because to be so driven in one belief system is I struggle with it. It boxes me in. It feels very claustrophobic to me to say, this is how I believe and only how I'm going to believe. It's hard for me.
Yeah.
Why paradox? Why did you land there?
Because, well, I think my parents are really different, and I identified pretty early on, like, wow, I have parts, like I have the sensitivity of my mom, and I have the creative vision and drive of my dad, and those things are seemingly at odds.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm out creating and moving forward, and I'm also aware of the impact on everybody else around me, and I'm sensitive to that, and I want to make sure, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, so that's one of the things where I first noticed that. But I've generally, like, I follow the rules, and I also rebel. Like I got married at 20, had a baby at 21, and I went to school and had and was a performing, like, I kind of did the expectation, but I did it my way, you know? So that just resonates with me. I'm really self-absorbed, and I'm also incredibly generous.
Yeah.
I have a ton of faith, and I'm totally skeptical, you know? Like, it just resonates. And I've gotten a lot more comfortable with that. Like, oh, yeah, that's pretty much how life is.
Is that, from now, shift a little bit, but think through clinically, is there something more, maybe not the word more, but is it healthier from a mind perspective, from a mental health perspective, to use the word "and"? Right.
Oh,
one of my
that's
favorite,
the best word in the whole vocabulary.
I mean, one of my favorite songs, you know, basically says, "I'd rather be a comma than a full stop." Right. And the concept there is, I think that it's a play on people who have so much conviction that they are rigid. And being rigid, if it makes sense, like I think especially LDS culture conviction means strength and you're never going to sway. But at times it's to have so much rigidity, you're brittle, can break.
Yeah.
So
This
talk more about
applies
this.
to mental health. So if you think about, like, on one side of one shore of like a river, there's rigidity, and the other there's too much flexibility, right? So we're always trying to navigate through that somewhere in the middle, because too much rigidity, like, think about in your body, is ill health. If you're not flexible, you're not as well as you could be.
Right.
And also in your thinking, if you're rigid in your thinking, you're not flexible, you're not going to be as mentally well. If you're rigid in your emotion and you're just either disconnected from it or totally overwhelmed by it, you're not going to be as healthy. And so I think that's a great analogy to, like, point to what therapy is helping people navigate and not be too rigid. Like, certain mental illnesses are about, like, rigidity, and others are just like so much flexibility, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that that integration of both, like the binary, is a huge part of what I work with clients on. We tend to, and as kids, we develop this black and white thinking, right? That's a good person, that's a bad person,
Yeah.
It's a stranger, that's bad. That's, but I think part of maturity and emotional and mental health is being able to, like, put your arms around all of it. Like, right? I'm a good person and a bad person. And so are you. And, like, we're both. And to have that more flexibility and using
Yeah.
like, you can be angry and loving. You can be sad and grateful. You can,
Yeah.
I love the word "and."
It's healthy. I mean, it allows options. You talked about options and leaving your options open. One of the Dr.Julie Hanks, especially online personas, is strong woman, right? Strong woman. I don't know if you would call yourself a feminist,
Yeah,
but
for
say
sure.
more, double click on this, because I think that there's a perception for some that there's anti-establishment or anti, organization, whatever that may be. And as I've gotten to know you and spent time with you, there's wisdom backing your stance based on life experience, based on clinical experience, based on your own frank, just experience in life as a woman. So will you say more about that?
Yeah. So I've had to develop a strong sense of self. I didn't have a lot of women that I knew who had that, like, who could say hard things and have hard conversations and stand up for themselves and say no. And kind of so many women that I've known throughout my life are supporting characters in their own life. And I'm like, I want to be the main character of my life. Like, who else could be it?
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like I had to figure that out a lot on my own. I don't feel like my church helped much with that.
Yeah.
My family didn't really help much with that.
Was there an expectation that it should?
That the church
Meaning,
should?
yeah, meaning as you grew up, I think that for many of us who grew up LDS, there is a sense that the church is the ultimate authority of people's lives.
Well, that's what the church teaches.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of people believe that.
But say more about that, because I think there's a concept there of authority. And, at the very core of religious, upbringing in my world, there's a sense of that, that the authority is church or the church. But at the core doctrinal belief is agency, this paradox, right? Agency versus authority. And whose authority is it? And do I give it away? Do I delegate it to others? So talk more about authority.
Yeah. There's a development developmental stages, but I think as people mature, they take more responsibility for their own choices and outsource less. Not everybody, right? There's some people that are fine outsourcing their authority, and it works for them. But it didn't work for me, and it doesn't work for a lot of my female clients who were raised in the LDS faith.
Yeah.
Because they abandoned themselves in order to please authority in many cases, whether that's their male partner or their bishop or their father or,
Yeah.
And so I just have seen so many women, and was that woman too, that was just seeking approval externally and looking for that authority, and it just doesn't work for a lot of people.
Yeah. What does work? And is there a different way to arrive at a higher level of followership and commitment and discipleship if you first take your own self-authority, own it, and then say, now that I own it and have control over my life and destiny, now I can make empowered choices. And if that choice is here, back to the organization, now I feel empowered and I'm choosing to do it versus it being chosen for me.
Right. Yeah, you said it beautifully. That's exactly it. And that's a huge theme in the work that I've done personally and in my practice is helping people identify, what do you want? What do you think? What do you feel? Not what you should or what you've been told, but what do you actually want to create?
So in the dialogue that goes on online, sometimes you'll post something and then there's
people freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that really at the core of the issue? Is you're trying to inform empowerment of the individual? You're not necessarily saying, go away from, you've been pushed down and you've been, controlled. I mean, it's not an anti-thing.
No, it's your life. You get to decide. You get to make these choices.
Yeah.
And you get to decide what other voices you consider. Right? I'm not saying like don't consider anyone else's voices or opinions or feelings or right?
Yeah.
It's not like either or. But ultimately it's I have felt like I have to answer for my life. Like, what did I do with my life?
Yeah. What's the end result of someone who comes in with that struggle? Hey, got to figure this out. I'm struggling, being a mother, a spouse, being, a member of the LDS church. I don't ever feel like I've had like control or the ability to influence my own trajectory that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they come in and they go through the process of kind of empowerment and what am I capable of doing and owning in my own life. When they go through that process, what's the outcome?
It depends on the person, and it depends on their relationships, and it depends on what they want.
Yeah.
It's easy for people to overcorrect, right? To go to the extreme of like only considering what they want.
Yeah.
And not looking at the impact. But part of emotional maturity is having a self and being aware of the impact of that you have on other people, because relationships matter.
Yeah. And is that the core of the paradox of it? Is trying to find two truths. They tend to conflict.
Yeah.
How can I be a strong-willed woman who's empowered to make my own choices and also still stay married to a man or be involved in an organization that's mostly run by men, right? That is the paradox, and that's not an easy one, frankly, to live with. But is in the therapeutic process that you're going through, is it trying to create that emotional maturity and an understanding around paradoxes? It doesn't have to be black or white it doesn't have to be black or white. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To frame it differently. Like you actually get to choose your relationship with whoever, including the church.
Yeah.
But it's actually in your control and your choice.
Yeah.
And that's just like a huge, like, what? You know,
It
really?
is. When we talked about what should we talk about
Mm-hmm.
before this, the term of the day was enmeshment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe give a definition of that. But I think it's a good segue to go from what we're discussing, which is this idea of unhealthy relationships when maybe you're too close to the situation in an unhealthy way, and how that kind of pivots into whether it's parenting or other relationships, friendships, spouses, whatever it may be. But describe enmeshment and why that was important to you.
Yeah. So it's kind of the other side of what we've been talking about, taking charge of your life, knowing who you are, being respectful of other people. But enmeshment is where you're not sure whose thoughts and feelings are whose beliefs are who's running the show. It's unclear.
Yeah.
And I see that in a lot of families, a lot of adult people with their families of origin too. Like there's so much, well, I can't disappoint my mom,
Yeah.
And this is like a 50-year-old.
We joke about it,
But it's true. It's real. Like it's
totally real.
right? We love our parents. We don't want to disappoint. Yeah. So there's enmeshment and then there's separation, right? Like cutting someone off.
Yeah.
Those are seemingly opposites, but they're like two sides of the same coin. The goal is to have a self and remain connected.
Yeah.
So to know who you are, and that's called differentiation of self. So you know what you think and feel, want and need, and you can convey that in a relationship, and you are aware that the other person is not you,
Yeah.
but you value them, and so you're in relationship with them.
Another brilliant woman would call that self-authorship, that I've heard her speak about often, another mental health clinician, which I think is, these concepts are sometimes they may be hard clinically to understand, but let's put them in a situation, in terms of enmeshment. So if, I hear about this often, in our world. Child is raised, don't have a lot of freedom. They don't have a lot of self-authorship in their home. They go on an LDS mission. They struggle big time. They have not had a lot of freedom to make their own choices. Then they go on a mission. They have all the freedom to a degree, right? They're still following mission rules. They have a mission president, but they don't necessarily know what to do. They have not had their own authority, so to speak. And now they don't necessarily know what to do because they've been enmeshed. Right? They've been in a relationship with parents where there's so much influence on parents. And is that an example?
Yeah.
To kind of talk through that listeners may hear and go, oh yeah, so this is interesting.
Yeah. Or people going on a mission because parents want them to, but they don't want to.
Yeah.
But going for someone else. Like that's kind of an enmeshed thing as well. Yeah, and I think enmeshment comes, like we come by it out of love, like the motivation is love, but it's also for parents, it's wanting to look good. Like I want my child to reflect well on me. So it's really actually a self-absorbed thing, right? Like I want to control you so I look good.
The fruits of their life is a reflection on, am I good at what I'm doing as a parent?
Right.
Could it also be fear? Just I'm scared that they're
going to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, that they're going to make wrong choices.
I don't want them to hurt.
Yeah, which so is pain, but it to a degree it also reverts back to but if they make bad choices and there's bad outcomes, then I suck as a parent.
Right.
So, yeah, you're right.
But or they'll be in pain, which pains me, and I don't want to be in pain.
Yeah.
I don't want them in pain because I won't be able to fix it. And that pains me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Parenting is a giant paradox.
Oh my gosh.
So challenging.
Yeah. It's
So,
about like connection and letting go, love and letting go.
yeah. When you think of your own children now, your older two versus your younger two, was there a space between there where you learned this concept of, maybe we need to do this differently? Or, I mean, was it an experiment in your own family that this concept started to gel that way? Or was it just your clinical experience of years and years of sitting with families and going, yeah, this is a problem?
It's both. It's learning from my own family of origin, learning from my family of procreation, and then clinical experience. And also self confrontation, like, oh, wow, I really care too much about, like, why do I care more about their grades than they do? That's a problem. Like, like looking at myself honestly and going, oh, okay, wait a second. I'm,
Yeah.
trying to grow myself and be aware of when I'm falling into that enmeshment, or
Yeah.
like, how can I differentiate?
That is a similar concept of just the addiction process. If families care more about the person, the getting treatment than the person who's actually addicted, it's not going to change.
Right.
Right. So then what? What's the answer then for enmeshment? What are the, and I know we're short on time, but what would you say? What would your advice be about that concept?
Yeah. So really, the answer is being able to tolerate difference. So you don't have to like difference, but being able to tolerate it. So if your child says, well, I don't want to go to that movie, or I don't want to go to church, or I don't like this, or like being able to honor that, not necessarily that the kid's going to get what they want,
Yeah.
but to like recognize that this is a different person having a different experience. They're not an extension of you. And that's good.
Yeah.
That's actually, they're supposed to be that. Like they're supposed to be
Yeah.
They're
human.
not you.
Yeah. I mean, the byproduct of that would be parents who say often, because I said so.
Yeah.
Right. Just
Right. That doesn't
because.
fly anymore.
Yeah.
Kids are like, what?
Totally. That's not easy.
Yeah. Oh,
Not-
and it's parenting is the hardest thing. And
Yeah.
the most, like, I've learned the most from parenting.
Totally.
Well, and marriage.
Yeah. The two hardest things you'll ever do. Right.
For sure. Like, singing, running a business, that's nothing.
Yeah, for sure. Any last thing you want to freestyle on? We got to do a round two, because
Ooh,
I have 100 more questions just on enmeshment itself as a
I
parent.
know we talked more about like, assertive, like more about
Yeah.
being a strong sense of self. This has been delightful. I don't really have.
No, it is good.
Do you have a final question?
I do have one question. So combining the two concepts for a father or a mother
Yeah.
who they have not had a lot of self-authorship in their own life,
Yeah.
are they more likely to be enmeshed
Yes.
in their relationships
Yes.
than those parents who have self-authorship? They can be married and still be an individual. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Are they more likely to allow their own children to be individuals because they themselves have been afforded that? They value that.
Yes. Yes, definitely. So the best gift that parents can give their children is to do their own personal growth. Like, look at yourself, reflect on, like, gosh, why? Be curious. Why? Gosh, do I get so upset with this one child about, like,
Yeah.
because you think it's about your kids. It's about you. It's not about your kids. Like, if you have a hard time with one kid, it's about you. Like, what is this child bringing up for you that you need to look at or heal or resolve?
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's never about the kids, right? But we always we tend to go, if I could just control their behavior, then everything would be fine. But often it's the better question is, what does this child have to teach me that's really hard?
Yeah. That's often said and way easier to do
Oh
as
yeah,
as a parent.
yeah,
But the long game, playing the long game, is that if you can figure that out while they're young, I mean, the end goal for me as a parent is that I have children who can be independent of me,
right,
so that, so that they can thrive and enjoy their own life. It's hard to get them there if you don't help them build that capability. We started way back an hour and a half ago
yeah,
talking about how do you master a craft, right? How do you get into flow? And you get into flow by building years and years of capability and confidence. We are there again. How do you get your children into flow?
mm.
And they can't get there unless you give them the reins sometimes, right? To
Right,
build the capability.
right,
So,
exactly. Yeah, they have to develop that, like problem solving and identifying what they think, feel, want, and need. Being able to like that's important to know about yourself.
yeah. When you mentioned it, when you were in those informative years, my diagnosis was that I was a creative. And I think that for so many kids, they haven't self-diagnosed because they haven't had the freedom to know and to
Hmm.
do it, to learn and to
Yeah,
kind of discover that. That is a cool thing about therapists, is that they help those find that creative or who they are,
yeah, right. Help
So,
define like who are you? Who do you want to be? What do you want to create with your life? And what's getting in the way? I mean, that's all we do.
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hanks, for 30 years of everything
Thanks,
you're
Tom.
doing. This is
Thank
so
you.
great.
It's been fun.
It's been awesome. You've had your
Thank
daily
you.
dose.